Folks, you don't understand what this is going to do to Islam. The majority of Muslims don't know this, and they'll be shocked to hear this, and they'll say you're lying. A leading Islamic scholar, Fred McGraw-Donner, notice what he says. At the center of the town was the shrine called the Kaaba, a large cubical building with a sacred black stone affixed in one corner. That was the sanctuary to the pagan god Hubal. What are some of the pagan practices that Muhammad adopted? This is Karen Armstrong. They would kiss the black stone embedded in the wall of the Kaaba, which was probably a meteorite that had once hurled to the ground. Oh, so wait, the pagans before Muhammad used to kiss the black stone and Muhammad adopted it? Now we know why the pagans did it. Why is Muhammad doing it? Then she says in that same source, officially the shrine was dedicated to Hubal, an Nabatean deity, and there was 360 idols arranged around the Kaaba, probably representing the days of the year. Karen Armstrong, you are not hostile to Islam. You're very friendly to Islam, and you bend over backwards to appease Muslims. And Muslims even invite you to lecture in their meetings, and they praise your books. And you admit that the shrine was officially dedicated to Hubal? Then who is Allah? If the Kaaba is the shrine of Allah, but it's the shrine of Hubal, and you can't have a shrine for more than one God, the necessary logical inference and conclusion, Allah was the name of Hubal, Hubal was the name of Allah. How do you get around it? That's the mastermind of Satan. Allah was the name for Hubal. Hubal is Baal. But in order to mislead and deceive people from realizing that they're worshiping the god Baal, he raised up Muhammad, the son of Satan, this Antichrist, and got Muhammad to disconnect, disassociate Allah from Hubal, so that the connection between Hubal and Allah was lost, so that you wouldn't see that Allah was simply Baal, in order to then deceive people into Baal worship, but disguising it as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Islam is nothing more than revamped Baal worship, and Baal was the chief competitor to Jehovah, and he's still the chief competitor to Jehovah under the guise of Islam. And even here, F.E. Peters, in his book, Hajj, this Muslim historian says, Amr ibn Luhay brought with him to Mecca an idol called Hubal from the land of Hit in Mesopotamia. Hubal was one of the Quraysh's greatest idols, so he set it up at the well inside the Kaaba and ordered the people to worship it. Thus, a man coming back from a journey would visit it and circumambulate the house before going to his family, and would shave his hair before it, all of which Muslims do. Circumambulate the Kaaba and shave their heads. Here, the source is saying the pagans were doing that before Muhammad. Now, let me read Ibn Kathir. Are you ready now for this story? The biography of Muhammad, the Prophet, by Ibn Kathir. Volume 1, pages 125, 126. Ibn Ishaq stated, it is claimed that when Abdul Muttalib received such opposition from Quraysh over the digging of Zamzam, he vowed that if 10 sons were born to him, who grew up and protected him, he would sacrifice one of them for the God at the Kaaba. So notice his vow. If I have 10 sons, I will sacrifice one of them for God at Kaaba. Do you remember what the person said earlier? Oh yeah, but Baal demanded human sacrifice. Did you just catch it? Abdul Muttalib promised that if Allah gave him 10 sons, he would sacrifice one of his sons, a human sacrifice to Allah. Baal demanded human sacrifice. Allah demands human sacrifice. Let's see who's going to see this. Eventually, he had 10 sons grown up whom he knew would give him protection. Their names were Al-Harith, Al-Zubair, Hajl, Dirar, Al-Muqawwim, Abu Lahib, Al-Abbas, Hamza, Abu Talib, and Abdullah. He assembled them and told them of his vow and asked them to honor his pledge to God Almighty, Allah Azwajal, and all glorious is He. This is in Arabic, it's Allah. God in English, but Arabic Allah. So he vowed to Allah. Okay. They obeyed and asked him what he wanted them to do. He asked each of them to take an arrow, write his name on it, and return to him. Now watch this. Remember, he's going to go to Allah and sacrifice Allah. They did so and went with him inside the Kaaba to the site of their god Hubal, where there was the well in which offerings to the Kaaba would be placed. There, near Hubal, were 7 arrows which they would use for divining a judgment over some matter of consequence, a question of blood money, kinship, or the like. They would come to Hubal to seek a resolution, accepting whatever they were ordered to do or to refrain from. Guys, can you help me understand? If you made the vow to Allah, why are you going to the idol Hubal? And why did Ibn Kathir say that's your God? The God of Muhammad's family, the God of his grandfather, and his father was Hubal. It goes on to say that the lot fell on Abdullah, Muhammad's father. So Hubal wanted Abdullah to be killed. But then the Quraysh said, no, don't kill him. Make a deal with your God to see if he'll take camels in place. Now watch here. They left for Medina, where they found the diviner whose name was Sajjah. So they went to a witch to ask the witch, how can we appease Allah? How can I appease Allah so I don't kill Abdullah? Why would you go to a witch, a soothsayer, to tell you how to appease Allah? Are you catching this? I don't know if it's sinking in. What kind of God is Allah that would allow Abdul Muttalib to go to a soothsayer, a witch, a kahina, one who contacts spirits, to tell him how to appease Allah. And this is Ibn Kathir, one of the greatest Muslim scholars, saying this. So they left for Medina, where they found the diviner whose name was Sajah, as Yunus bin Bukayr reported from Ibn Ishaq, that was at Khaybar. They rode off again and went to her and sought her advice. Abdul Muttalib telling her of the whole problem regarding him and his son. She told him, leave me today until my attendant spirit comes and I can ask him. Wow. So not only do you go to a witch, a soothsayer, she says, wait, my spirit will show up. In other words, a demon, a Satan. And that demon and Satan will tell you how to ransom your son Abdullah. And Allah is going to accept it. Allah is going to accept it, folks. Allah is going to allow Abdul Muttalib to go to a witch, a soothsayer, and allow an evil spirit, a demon, a spirit to tell her how to appease Allah, and Allah is going to be okay with it. Now, what would the true God, Jehovah, Yahweh do? If an Israelite went looking for a witch and took the advice of the spirit that inspired that witch to appease Jehovah, what would God do, the true God do? Okay, now watch, let's keep going. They left her and Abdul Muttalib prayed to Allah. So he's praying to Allah. Next day, they went back to her and she informed them that she had a message. How much is the blood money you prescribe? She asked, 10 camels. Okay, and then they says, okay, go back and present your man as an offering and do the same with 10 camels. Then cast arrows to decide between him and them. If the dividing arrows point to him, then add to the number of camels until your God is satisfied. Keep doing this deadening of arrows until it points to the camels, not your son. Okay? And once it points to the camels, then you know that's how many camels you sacrifice to ransom your son Abdullah from being murdered. If it points to the camels, then sacrifice them in his place. That way you will please your God and save your man. So they went back to Mecca. When they had agreed to do so, as she had said, Abdul Muttalib said prayers to God, Allah. Then they offered up Abdullah and the 10 camels as sacrifice and cast the arrow. At that point, the men of Quraysh told Abdul Muttalib, who was standing near Hubal, praying to Allah, it's all over. Your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. Wait, earlier it says their God was Hubal, and it says as he's praying to Allah, he's before the statue Hubal. At this point, the men of Quraysh told Abdul Muttalib, who was standing near Hubal, praying to Allah. Arabic is Allah, a God. It's all over. Your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. But wait, who's his God? Is it Allah or Hubal? Because earlier Ibn Kathir told us this. They did so and went with them inside the Kaaba to the side of their God Hubal. Hold on. Abdul Muttalib prays to Allah by standing in front of the idol Hubal. Hubal is said to be his God and the God of his family. But then the Quraysh said, it's all over, your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. So I'm really confused. If his God is Hubal and he's praying to Allah, but he's shuffling arrows to the statue Hubal, and he's before the statue Hubal praying to Allah, are you trying to convince me that Hubal is not Allah, Allah is not Hubal? Why does Allah accept Abdul Muttalib going to a soothsayer witch? And why does Allah accept a demon telling that witch soothsayer how to appease Allah? And why is Abdul Muttalib going before the statue Hubal and shuffling arrows and praying to Allah at the statue of Hubal? And if Allah is his God, why did Ibn Kathir say Hubal is his God? What's going on here? What's the conclusion? Who is Allah truly? He is Baal. And Baal is another name of Satan. What more proof do you guys need from the Muslim sources when you combine them together that Islam is nothing more than Baal worship repackaged by Satan through his man Muhammad in order to entice the people of God today away from the worship of Jehovah like Baal did during the Old Testament period? How many of you are overwhelmed and shocked by the evidence? And how many of you are now convinced Islam is nothing more than Baal worship repackaged by Satan? I'm not saying Muslims knowingly worship the false god Baal. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, if you're familiar with the Hebrew scriptures, you will note that the main competitor for the worship and allegiance of the Israelites was the false god Baal. All throughout the Old Testament, you'll find God chastening, disciplining, rebuking, punishing, even exiling his people for their habitual habit of turning to the false god Baal, B-A-A-L, right? The name Baal also pops up in the New Testament under the name Beelzebub. If you read Mark 3, for instance, 22 all the way 30, the Jews accused Jesus of casting out demons by Beelzebub, the prince of demons. Baal, that's the word Baal. Zebul means Lord of the flies, Lord of the house. But the chief god that Satan used to get Israel to worship something or someone other than Jehovah, was Baal. In fact, Baal is simply Satan's disguise. Because if you go with what the Jews said in Mark 3, 22 to 30, if you go with the Jews, Beelzebub, Lord of the flies or Lord of the house, is the prince of demons. But the prince of demons would be Satan. So here, if the Jews are right, and Jesus didn't correct them, he didn't correct them saying, no, you're wrong, Beelzebub is not the prince of the demons, the ruler of demons. That means Beelzebub, Baal, is simply another name of Satan, because there's only one ruler of demons, Satan. He rules the kingdom of darkness. All evil spirits are subject to him. So if Beelzebub or Beelzebul is the ruler of demons, then that means that's another name for Satan. Now, if that's true, and the Bible indicates that's the case, Baal is simply Satan disguising himself as a god to lead people away from the worship of the true God. If that's true, Allah is simply another name for Baal, and Islam is simply another form of Baal worship, then that actually further confirms Islam is the religion of the devil. It's Satan's religion that Satan inspired through Muhammad to be the competitor against Judeo-Christianity, Judaism, Christianity. And that would make sense, right? Because all throughout Old Testament history, the chief competitor to Yahweh, Yahovah, was Baal. Right now, as we speak, the chief competitor, the chief religion competing for the devotion of the hearts and minds of not just the world, but of Jews and Christians, is Islam. So it's like history repeating itself. As Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun. The same lie, the same deceit, the same trickery being promoted throughout the ages, but under different disguises, repackaged. It's the same deceit, but repackaged, right? So just like during the Old Testament period, Baal was the chief antagonist of Yahovah, vying for the affection of the Jews, the Israelites. Now you have Baal again competing for the affections of believers, but under the guise of Islam, under the name of Allah. You understand where I'm going with this? You understand why it's important to understand? Is Islam simply the religion of Baal, a form of Baal worship? So make sure you save the links, okay? Okay, now, let me now qualify what I'm saying. There's a caveat. That doesn't mean the Muslims knowingly worship Baal. Thank the triune God for that. The Father, Son, Spirit. Thank the Lord Jesus. That doesn't mean Muslims know they're worshiping Baal. That's the deception. That's the deceit. Just like when the Israelites worshiped Baal, they didn't think they were worshiping Satan. Exactly, Winter King. Alat would simply be the Arabicized name for Ishtar, Astarte, Ishtar, Esther. Thank you, 100%. Okay, just like, follow with me. And Adrian Crescendi, what do you think jihad is? Don't insult me and don't let me block you. What do you think jihad is if it's not human sacrifice for Allah? Are you serious? One of the chief pillars in spreading Islam is jihad, human sacrifice, killing the infidels, and that's not human sacrifice? Just like the Israelites did not think they were worshiping Satan when they worshiped Baal. Did they think they were worshiping Satan? Do you think the Israelites thought they were worshiping demons when they worshiped Baal, or they worshiped Astarte, Ishtar, or they worshiped Eel's consort Asherah? Do you think they thought that they were worshiping Satan and demons, evil spirits? Even though the Israelites did not think they were worshiping demons, Satan and demons, when they worshiped the gods and goddesses of the nations, Baal. In some places, Baal was a chief god. In other places, they knew he was a son of El, but still, he became the patron deity of many people. And I trust the Holy Spirit to guide me to address this issue correctly. They still were worshiping demons nonetheless. Deuteronomy 32, verses 16 to 17. Talking about the Israelites, they provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, provoked him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers fear not. Did you catch it? The Israelites were sacrificing to devils, to demons, though that's not what they thought they were doing. You with me there? Similarly, Muslims don't think they're worshiping Baal. They think they're worshiping the true God of Abraham, and that's the deceit of Satan. Satan doesn't care whether you know you're worshiping him or not. In fact, he doesn't care whether you acknowledge he exists or not. He doesn't even care if you're an atheist. He just doesn't want you to know the true God and the true gospel, because that's the only way you can escape him and overcome him, right? So here are the three facts I want to establish. Facts that either the sources themselves come out and say, or facts that are derived from what these sources are saying, what they call the natural inference, the necessary inference, the conclusion of what they're saying. Okay, here are the three facts. And this is all in my articles. Fact number one, Hubal. Hubal was the chief deity, the chief god of Mecca and of the shrine, the Kaaba. That's the first fact. Fact number two, Hubal was actually Baal. Hubal, and the Muslim sources will testify, was actually the Arabic name for Baal. Some people believe Hubal either comes from Hubal, he is Baal, two Arabic words, or it is an Arabicized corruption of the Hebrew words Ha-Baal, the Baal. Okay, let me spell it out. Some people will tell you that Hubal is either Arabic for who, he, Baal, is Baal, or it's the Arabic corruption of Ha-Baal. The two Hebrew words Ha-Baal means the Baal. The third fact that obviously the sources don't come out and say it. The sources don't come out. Do you want to get blocked, brother? Make my day. The third fact, the sources don't come out and say it, but that's the logical, necessary inference, okay? Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. If you actually read, quote unquote, between the lines, you're going to see Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. I want to give you a little background on the pagan religion in Mecca. Mecca, Medina, that's Arabia. Mecca, according to the Muslim sources, is the place where Muhammad was born. He belonged to the Quraysh tribe. The Quraysh tribe, which was an Arab tribe that lived in Mecca. And according to the Muslim sources, the Meccans were into astral worship. Astral worship. Now I'll explain what astral worship means. Like other ancient civilizations, they associated the planets and the sun and moon with their gods and goddesses. And that link I gave you, I'm quoting the late Abdullah Yusuf Ali in his translation of the Quran, which I quote. He admits that the Arabs before Muhammad and during the time Muhammad were into astral worship, where they worshiped the sun and moon and 5 planets because they thought there were only 5 planets. Now let's do the math. Sun, moon, 5 planets, that's 7, right? Follow with me. That's 7, right? Sun and moon and 5 planets, that's 7. Now, in many cultures, the sun was the male deity and the moon was the female deity. The sun was the male deity and the moon was the female consort, the female deity. Not in Arabia. In Arabia, the moon was the male deity and the sun was the female deity. And the sun was the consort, the wife of the moon. Are you with me there? Let me read what he says. This is a Muslim. Now, he's passed away, but he admits this. To revert to the worship of the heavenly bodies, okay? A few individual stars did attract the worshippers' attention, e.g. Sirius. First, last, and Protestant, text me if I'm buffering because I can't see because I got to read. I have my phone here, God willing. So the Arabs worship Sirius, the dog star, the brightest fixed star in the heavens with a blush tinge in its light. It is probably Sirius that is referred to as the fixed star in the parable of Abraham. With regard to the fixed stars and their myriads, the astronomers turn their fancy to devising groups or constellations. Now, here's where it's going to get relevant. Okay, but the moving stars are planets, each with a motion and therefore will or influence of its own, right? As they knew and understood them, they were 7 in number. That's what they thought, 7. And now he tells you what the 7 are. Viz, 1 and 2, the moon and the sun. So count. The 2 objects which most closely and indubitably, my lisp, influence the tides, the temperatures, and the life in our planet. 3 and 4, the 2 inner planets, Mercury and Venus. So that's 4 so far, Mercury and Venus, which are morning and evening stars and never travel far from the sun. 5, 6, and 7, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the outer planets whose elongation from the sun on the ecliptic can be as wide as possible. The number 7 itself is a mystical number, as explained in note 5526. Okay, now, notice what he's going to say. It would be noticed that the sun and the moon and the 5 planets, God identified, these 7 planets in total, sun and moon and the 5 planets, they got identified, associated with, each with a living deity, god or goddess, with characteristics and qualities of its own. Now, before I read the rest of the part, did you catch what he just said? This is a Muslim whose Quran translation was widely circulated and distributed in the 20th century. Okay, did you see what he just said? The Arabs in Mecca, in Arabia, but in Mecca, worshipped the sun and moon and 5 planets as 7 gods and goddesses. 7, right? You're going to see the relevance in a minute. You're going to see the relevance in a minute. And I hope I don't put you to sleep here, okay? I want you to listen. It's the relevance. Now, let me read the rest of it. Let me skip and let me get to the relevant part. He goes, and the Arabic word for the moon, qamar, the Arabic word for the moon, qamar, is of the masculine gender. And on the other hand, the Arabic word for the sun, shams, is of the feminine gender. The pagan Arabs evidently looked upon the sun as a goddess and the moon as a god. So the Arabs in Mecca, Arabia in general, but Mecca specific because that's where Muhammad was born. They viewed the moon as the male god and the sun as the female god, the goddess. That's going to be important. Okay, so basically, I don't need to read the rest of it, but you can read it on your own leisure. Okay, folks, let me bring out the implication. The sources teach that the Kaaba in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, was a shrine that housed 360 idols. This is in the Muslim sources. It's not non-Muslim sources. 360 idols, okay, which Muhammad eventually destroyed. Okay. The Muslim sources also admit these are all documented in the articles I gave you. So you need to read these articles so you can have the sources to use to your Muslim friends. Well, so where are you getting this from? Here, I got it from Abdullah Yusuf Ali. The pagans before Muhammad would perform what they call the rites of pilgrimage, right? Hajj and Umrah, meaning they would come to the Kaaba, and those who live there didn't need to travel. The Kaaba, that cube building that's been rebuilt on more than one occasion in Mecca, and the pagans would run around it 7 times. 7 times. Something Muslims do to this day. Muslims adopted these practices from the pagans. Muslims, like the pagans before them, right, would run 7 times. Okay, and then there are 2 hills in Mecca called Safa and Marwa, and they'd run between these hills 7 times. 7 times. And the Muslim sources say that at one time there were 2 idols on both hills. There was an idol here and an idol there, and they'd run 7 times. Now, folks, can I ask you a question? Why did the pagans run 7 times between the 2 hills, Safa and Marwa, and run around the Kaaba 7 times? Practices which Islam adopted, Muhammad observed, and Muslims continue to this day. But why did the pagans do it? Why did the pagans do it? They did it in worship of the gods and goddesses, the 7 planetary deities. Thank you. So, folks, why in the world did Muhammad continue that practice? And why are Muslims running around the Kaaba 7 times and between the 2 hills 7 times? All of which, even the Muslim sources admit, were practices that the pagans observed because they believed in the sun and moon and 5 planets as god and goddesses that they had to worship and venerate. Why are the Muslims still doing it? You know what their excuse is? You want to hear their silly excuse? Do you want to hear what their silly excuse is? Oh, because Ishmael settled in Mecca, and Abraham came and visited Ishmael, and Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba as the first house of worship. And so Ishmael taught them these practices, but as time went on, his descendants corrupted these practices and then attached them to gods and goddesses. So originally it was practices done for Yehovah, the worship of Jehovah. But then the descendants of Ishmael corrupted themselves, became idolaters, and then corrupted the practices and attached them to their gods and goddesses. Are you buying it? We're not buffering, Lisa. It's on your end. Are you buying that version of history? Does it make sense? And is it a coincidence that Ishmael told them, hey, run between the 2 hills 7 times, run around the Kaaba 7 times, and somehow, magically, 7 becomes the number of the gods and goddesses that the pagans worship because they thought there were 5 planets in the sun and the moon. Gee, what a coincidence. Let alone all the historical archaeological evidence refutes the claim that Ishmael went to Mecca. Because if you believe in your Bible, Genesis 21:21, it says Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran, and Paran is around Egypt and Canaan. It's not in Mecca. And Genesis 21:21 says, Genesis 21:21 says that Ishmael married an Egyptian because his mother Hagar was from Egypt, and she got him a wife from Egypt. So he never settled in Mecca, and he didn't marry an Arab woman and sired the Arabs in Mecca. That's Genesis 21:21. All right? You with me there? So at least we can know and confirm, and the Muslims agree, this much. This much the Muslims admit. The pagans were doing these things, running around the Kaaba 7 times and between 2 hills 7 times, and there was an idol on each side of the hill. And the pagans thought the sun and moon and the 5 planets were gods and goddesses. So at least the Muslims admit that much. Yeah, that's what they believed, and they did it for the gods and goddesses. That means everything else is nothing but fantasy, fairy tale, the Ishmael and the Abraham story. That is fantasy, fairy tale. But the Muslims are admitting that that other part of the story, that the pagans observed these practices long before Muhammad, and Muhammad was observing them, even when the house was steeped with 360 idols, that part they at least admit. Now, folks, let me add another thing as we get into the evidence. You remember what the source just stated? I just read Abdullah Yusuf Ali. He said to the Arabs, the moon, the Arabic word qammar, is masculine, denoting the fact that the Arabs viewed the moon as the male deity, meaning it was the planet, the astral object associated with the chief deity. And remember, the Arabs are what they call patriarchal society, meaning the male is the chief. So their god has to be male. He's the chief. The moon is the planet representing the chief male deity of their pantheon. You with me there? The sun is the female. Thank you, sister. God bless you. The sun is the female. The sun represents the female, the goddess, that's the wife of the male deity. Okay, now folks, the moon is the male deity. Okay. Because it's the planet associated with the chief god of the pantheon, the chief god worshipped by the Arab pagans and a host of gods and goddesses, and the chief god is male. So the moon, Qammar, that's a masculine now, so it's associated with the male deity who's the chief. But hold on, the chief deity is supposed to be Allah. Follow with me. The chief deity is supposed to be Allah. He's the chief deity, he's the male deity. Well, if the moon was viewed as masculine, Qammar, and it's the male deity or the planet or the object associated with the male deity, that means you just established that for the pagans, Allah was the moon god. Oh my goodness. Dum diddy dum dum. Did you get it? If we take what the sources say, remember, I said sometimes the sources will just come out and say something black and white. Other times they don't say it, but it's the necessary logical conclusion and inference for what they are saying. You with me there? And the sources I'm going to quote will say Hubal was the chief god and Hubal was the moon god. No, TBL, it's a little more complicated. Don't get into the crescent moon, because they'll tell you the crescent moon is a symbol because they go by a lunar calendar, and the crescent moon and the 5 stars was actually not there when Islam initially began. It was the Ottomans that adopted that. So don't get too much in the crescent moon. Okay, just follow with me. Now what I'm going to show you, I'm now going to confirm what I just said, that if you read the sources carefully and connect the dots, then the necessary logical conclusion and inference from what they're saying is this. Allah was the name of Hubal. Hubal is the moon god, and Hubal is actually the idol Baal. And I'm now going to show it to you. Let's begin. Because right now, the sources, if you go to this article, point number 1, Hubal, Mecca's chief deity, the chief god of Mecca, the god of the Kaaba, the god of that shrine, the Lord of that shrine in Mecca, the chief god of the pagans in Mecca was Hubal. This is what the sources say. So are you ready now? I'm going to be doing a lot of reading. I hope it doesn't bore you. Let me know, guys. Let me know if text me First, Last, or Protestant if I buffer. Okay, this comes from Gods, Goddesses, and Mythology. Now, again, I don't think I'll have to give you all the information, but Gods, Goddesses, and Mythology, volume 11, page 137. Hubal, chief god of the Kaaba, a martial and oracular, I can't even speak English, right? Let alone read. Oracular deity, a moon god. What was Hubal? A moon god. Oh my goodness. Who was the chief god of Mecca, of the Kaaba, of the shrine? Who was the chief god of the Kaaba, of Mecca? Hubal. And Hubal was the moon god. Are you seeing it? Okay, let's read another one. This comes from Cyril Glasse, and this comes from the New Encyclopedia of Islam. The New Encyclopedia of Islam, page 209. Hubal, an idol, the god of the moon. An idol, the god of the moon. What? An idol, the god of the moon? Here you go. It's right there in the article. Click on it. Let me read. Centuries before Islam, pay attention to this name. Centuries before Islam, Amr ibn Luhay, a chief of the tribe of Jurhum who dwelt in Mecca, before the coming of the Quraysh tribe, brought the idol to the city from Syria. Wow. We're going to revisit that, but let me finish it. It was set up in the Kaaba and became the principal idol of the pagan Meccans. Folks, understand the implication of what we just read? Hubal was an idol from Syria. An Arab named Amr ibn Luhay. Amr ibn Luhay brought the idol from Syria to Mecca, and Hubal became the chief god of Mecca. I don't think you understand the implication of it. The chief god in Syria among the pagans was Baal. Baal was the god that was worshipped by the Syrians before the time of Muhammad. If this Arab, Amr, brought the idol from Syria, what was he bringing to the Kaaba? The idol of Baal, before Muhammad. You want me to give you his social security as well? Whether it's a month before Muhammad, it doesn't matter. This is before Muhammad's time. Are you with me there? So he brought the idol Baal from Syria, and that's why it's called Hubal. Yes, Syria, from Syria, the Syrians. And notice Hubal became the chief god of the Kaaba of Mecca. So you understand what the sources just admit? Hubal is the god of the moon. He's the moon god. Hubal was the god of the Kaaba, the god of Mecca, the chief god. Hubal was the idol from Syria. These 3 facts are admitted explicitly by the sources. So now let's break it down. If Hubal is from Syria and the chief god worshipped in Syria is Baal, we just established Hubal is Baal. That means Baal was the chief god of Mecca, the chief god of the Kaaba, and Baal was then seen to be the moon god, the god of the moon. So who was the chief god of the Quraysh? Hubal. What tribe was Muhammad born from? Quraysh. So who was the chief god of Muhammad's family, of Muhammad's tribe, of Muhammad? Hubal. Who is Hubal? Baal. Muhammad was born in Baal worship. And this is Encyclopedia of Islam saying it. Do you understand what you just read? Encyclopedia of Islam. The chief god of the Quraysh was Hubal. Hubal was the god of the moon. an idol brought from Syria. Muhammad's tribe is Quraysh. She was born into the Quraysh tribe. That means Muhammad was born in a family that worshiped Baal.